You walk into a room and think you know what evil looks like. Horned devils, torture chambers, men in black leather coats. But in 1933, Germany, evil kept ledgers. The Gestapo didn't just terrorize, they paid for it. Cash for names, money for whispers. Reichsmarks for betrayal, every denunciation logged, every informer compensated, 12 years of payments tracked in books that could destroy a nation's soul. Then May 1945 arrives. Berlin burns, the Reich collapses, and someone has a choice to make about those ledgers. The system was simple, brutal, efficient. By 1937, the Gestapo employed 6,500 people across 54 regional offices. Düsseldorf had 126 officers watching 500,000 people. Hessen had 43 for 650,000. The math doesn't work until you add the invisible army, the V-Männer for Vertrauensmänner, trusted men, informers who weren't on the payroll but got paid anyway. The Gestapo office in Saarbrücken kept 50 full-term informers in 1939. Nuremberg's district office ran 80 to 100 between 1943 and 1945. Small numbers, huge impact. Because behind those professionals sat ordinary Germans ready to sell their neighbors. Research from historians Detlef Pukert, Robert Galetli, Reinhard Mann, Ingemar Solik, René Otto, Klaus Michael Malmann and Paul Gerhard, published through the 1980s and 90s in specialized academic journals on Nazi police structures, proved something uncomfortable. 80% of all Gestapo investigations started from denunciations by ordinary citizens, not surveillance, not detective work, tips, anonymous letters, whispered accusations. 10% came from other government branches, only 10% from the Gestapo's own efforts. The terror wasn't top-down, it was neighbor on neighbor, and somewhere, someone kept track of who got paid. If you value documented 20th century history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. The script is researched and factual. Using sources from the United States National Archives Record Group 242, the National Archives collection of foreign records seized, which contains captured Gestapo documentation released under the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act of 1998, Chais. Specifically, the German police records opened on March 23, $2,000, comprising photostatic reproductions and original files from Gestapo headquarters in Berlin, Copenhagen, Münster, Aachen, and other cities, with materials covering 1933 to 1945. Now back to the information. The payment structure existed. We know because fragments survived. The Reich Chancellery ran Konto 5, account 5, a slush fund that started with 150,000 Reichsmarks in 1933 and grew to 40 million by 1945. Wehrmacht generals got 4,000 Reichsmarks monthly from this account. One Reichsmark equaled roughly 40 cents in 1940, or about $13 in 2015 based on gold prices. The payments came with instructions from Hans Lammers, chief of the Reich Chancellery. Keep few written records. Tell no one. The secrecy was the point. If generals keeping the regime afloat got paid in shadows, what about the small-timers feeding information? Würzburg tells us volumes, one of the few German cities where most Gestapo records survived. The State Archive in Würzburg holds 24,780 arrest files. 3,071 refer to Jews, photos, mugshots, private identification pictures, a Gestapo photo album documenting deportees from 1941 to 1943. The files include denunciation records, who reported whom, when, why. Historian research on these files, particularly Robert Gilitali's 1988 article, The Gestapo and German Society, Political Denunciation in the Gestapo Case Files, published in The Journal of Modern History, Volume 60, Number 4, showed 40% of denunciations were personally motivated. Not ideology, revenge, jealousy. A Berlin stoker reported a prostitute who gave him venereal disease. She went to a concentration camp. A Mannheim housewife denounced her husband for criticizing Hitler because she wanted him gone so she could continue an affair with a soldier. But Würzburg's files don't include comprehensive payment ledgers. The arrest records survive, the investigation files, the transport lists of Lower Franconian and Nuremberg Jews, not the accounting books showing who got paid what for which tip. That absence matters. April 1945. The Red Army closes on Berlin. 2.5 million Soviet soldiers reach the capital by early April. By late April, they're fighting within hundreds of yards of the Reich Chancellery. The Gestapo headquarters sat at Prince Albrecht Strasse. The address Germans feared most. The building housed the Geheime Staatspolizei Central Command, the SS Reich Security Main Office, the SD Intelligence Service, and the Einsatzgruppen Coordination Offices, basements full of cells where people were tortured. Upper floors packed with filing cabinets, card indexes, personnel dossiers, agent rosters, and presumably, somewhere, payment records. Heinrich Müller ran the Gestapo as chief from 1939 forward. In December 1944, he told a top counter-espionage officer the Ardennes offensive would recapture Paris. He believed in victory even as Berlin burned. On May 1st, 1945, Soviet troops found Hitler dead in his bunker. Müller disappeared. Last seen in Berlin after the collapse, according to a counterintelligence war room fortnightly report covering the period ending June 18, 1945. His fate unknown. His files scattered. A CIA investigation from 1970 to 1971 tried to determine if Müller died in Berlin or escaped with key German police files into Soviet hands. The CIA's counterintelligence brief from December 1971 called it "The Hunt for Gestapo Müller," and concluded they couldn't determine his fate conclusively. What we know is this: the Gestapo employed torture routinely to extract confessions and punish enemies. The official evidence for this was destroyed by the Nazis. Gestapo case files are rarely found intact. That's from the Wikipedia article on the Gestapo, updated August 10, 2025, citing multiple academic sources on Nazi police methods. They destroyed evidence deliberately. In spring 1942, Heinrich Himmler ordered all traces of murdered Russian Jews and murdered prisoners of war removed from occupied Soviet territories. Bodies at Rumbala, near Riga, 25,000 mostly Latvian Jews shot in late 1941, were dug up and burned in 1943. Reinhard Heydrich, through Heinrich Müller, ordered Paul Blobel in Sonderaction 1005 to remove all traces of mass executions in the East. When defeat loomed, they burned the evidence. The Gestapo headquarters building was heavily damaged during Allied bombing raids and the final Battle of Berlin in April-May 1945. On April 29, 1945 at dawn, the 301st Soviet Rifle Division assaulted the Gestapo headquarters and captured it after heavy fighting. Return fire from SS defenders left bullet holes still visible today on nearby buildings like the Martin Gropius Bau Museum. After the battle, the site sat in ruins. In 1949, the West Berlin government demolished what remained. By the mid-1950s, all SS and Gestapo buildings were gone and rubble cleared. Nobody wanted to preserve the most feared address in Germany. But before the demolition, someone searched the ruins. The USS. British intelligence, and Soviet forces all wanted Nazi records. The counterintelligence war room operated by British MI5 and MI6 and the American Office of Strategic Services, X2 counterespionage branch, began planning in February 1945. They supervised the hunt for Germany's military and police intelligence services. They wanted names, structures, operations, and they wanted the Gestapo's files. Some material survived. The National Archives Record Group. 242 holds the proof, box after box of captured documents. Photostatic reproductions of card files regarding known or suspected Allied agents from 1939 to 1944. The originals recovered from the Gestapo headquarters building in Copenhagen. The cards include biographical data, business activities, espionage contacts, Communist Party membership, arrests, some photos, much information references specific documents subsequently destroyed. That phrase appears repeatedly. Vorgänger in February-März, proceedings in February-March, then a notation that the referenced files were destroyed. The Gestapo office in Copenhagen kept records that German forces didn't destroy before retreat. Denmark had some 550 uniformed Danes working with the Gestapo in Copenhagen, patrolling and terrorizing the population. Many were arrested after the war, but the payment structures, the financial accounting showing who got what for which denunciation, those specifics remain elusive in the captured Copenhagen files. France offers another angle. The Carling, French Gestapo, had 30,000 to 32,000 members conducting operations nearly indistinguishable from German equivalents. After liberation, some records fell into Allied hands, but the systematic payment ledgers showing compensation structures, not prominently featured in declassified materials. The National Archives also holds records from the Office of Military Government United States Zone, MOMGUS. The foreign exchange depository tracked valuables captured from Nazi Germany. Records relating to shipments of gold and silver from 1945 to 1947. Miscellaneous records regarding operations, payments and shipments from 1945 to 1948, including payment orders, cash books, inventory cards, registers, vouchers. Records relating to tabulation and classification of deposits from 1945 to 1949. The Merkers mine discovery in April 1945 yielded massive amounts of SS loot, but Gestapo informer payment ledgers not listed among the major findings. Consider what a comprehensive ledger system would contain. names of informers with their assigned codes. The Gestapo informer code system was simple. According to Dr. Claire Hubbard Hall's research presented at a Historical Association talk in March 2020, she was one of the first to fly to America to analyze files released by Clinton in the 1998 Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act. The code broke down as 01 vertical bar G vertical bar 127. The first two digits showed location, the letter indicated position. The final numbers identified the individual. 90% of informers were men, but whether this coding system extended to payment tracking remains unclear from surviving documentation. What would the ledgers prove? Every tip logged with compensation amount, every denunciation tied to a payment, the complete network of who sold out whom for how much. In Würzburg, of 84 cases of Rassenschande, race defilement, meaning sexual relations with non-Aryans, 45 cases started from denunciations by ordinary people, 2 from information provided by other government branches, 20 from information gained during interrogations on other matters. If informers got paid, the Würzburg ledgers would show 45 payments for race defilement denunciations. Multiply that across every Gestapo office in every German city across 12 years. The accounting would be staggering. The Berlin Gestapo kept surveillance files on communists, social democratic organizations, anti-fascist groups, Jewish organizations, reports on unreliable persons, Masonic lodges, police surveillance on activities outside Germany, newspaper clippings. These files, designated Fond 501 covering 1913 to 1945, were captured and are now held at the Russian State Military Archive. Selected records were microfilmed by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in 1993 and 2001. The collection includes correspondence, intelligence files, minutes, speeches, statistical tables, lists of members, but again, comprehensive payment ledgers specifically tracking informer compensation aren't the highlighted contents. Think about the cases we know. Stella Kubler worked as a catcher for the Gestapo during the war. She was Jewish. The Gestapo brutally tortured her until she agreed to locate Jews living illegally after removing their identifying stars. She's blamed for helping kill over 1,000 of her own people. Was she paid? Historical accounts mention she worked to save her own life, but cash compensation details? Unclear from surviving documentation. Another case, Eva Buch, communist activist studying foreign languages at Humboldt University. Involved with the Red Orchestra resistance group with associates in academia and the Air Ministry. Accused of passing secrets to the Soviet Union. Arrested October 10, 1942, after her flat was raided and an anti-Nazi leaflet she translated into French was discovered. A Gestapo officer told her she'd be treated leniently if she named collaborators. She refused. Was the officer authorized to pay for names? Did the Red Orchestra investigation generate payments to informers who helped crack the network? The Gestapo's Rote Kapelle operation between 1942 and 1945 was one of the greatest Soviet intelligence setbacks of the war. Agents were captured and turned, but financial records of that turning, not prominently preserved, the Gestapo ran on paper. Bureaucrats and clerical workers processing denunciations, overwhelmed with tips, most time spent sorting credible from non-credible accusations, many local offices understaffed and overworked, struggling with paper loads. Every allegation investigated with meticulous thoroughness, no matter how trivial. That required record keeping, files, carbon copies, registration logs, payment vouchers, if compensation changed hands. The question is, what happened to those payment vouchers? In 1981, pressure from the active Museum of Fascism and Resistance in Berlin led to excavations at the old Gestapo headquarters site. In 1986, they discovered jail cells. The finding led to establishing the Topography of Terror exhibit in 1987. Today, the site includes exposed basement walls, a documentation center opened May 6, 2010, and exhibitions covering the Gestapo, SS, and Reich Security main office on Wilhelm and Prince Albrecht Strasse. Visitors walk through preserved foundations, but the exhibition draws from scattered surviving documents, photographs, testimonies, not from intact accounting ledgers showing the financial machinery of terror. Here's what makes the missing ledgers significant. After the war, Germany prosecuted collaborators and Gestapo agents. Between November 14, 1945 and October 3, 1946, the Allies established an international military tribunal to try 22 major Nazi war criminals and 6 groups for crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Comprehensive payment ledgers would have been devastating prosecution evidence. They would show the breadth of complicity, not just Gestapo officers following orders, not just fanatical Nazis, but shopkeepers, neighbors, teachers, doctors, all receiving payment for denunciations. The ledgers would quantify the banality of evil in Reichsmarks and Pfennigs. Consider the denazification process. Germany screened millions of people after the war to determine their involvement with the Nazi regime. Classification ranged from major offenders to exonerated persons. Evidence determined classification. Someone holding a card showing they received regular payments from the Gestapo for information, that would override claims of ignorance or non-involvement. The ledgers would have been a roadmap for justice. Their absence meant prosecutors worked with fragments, testimony, partial records, individual case files, but not the master accounting. The Office of Strategic Services released approximately 400,000 pages of previously classified documents in June 2000 under the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act. OSS records from 1942 to 1945, and Strategic Services Unit records from 1945 to 1946. These documents offered glimpses of how much Western officials knew about Nazi atrocities and specific perpetrators in 1945 and 1946. Among the documents were interrogation reports, debriefings, intelligence assessments. One of OSS's best informants was Fritz Kolbe, codenamed George Wood, an anti-Nazi German Foreign Office official who carried hundreds of documents to Switzerland to meet with OSS officials. A September 1945 State Department debriefing of Kolbe revealed he worked with about 20 other Germans in an inner circle. But even with this intelligence windfall, systematic Gestapo financial records weren't among the treasures. The CIA name file on Heinrich Müller contains results of an internal investigation from 1970 to 1971 to determine if Müller died in Berlin or survived in Soviet hands. Israeli capture of Adolf Eichmann in 1960 fanned speculation that Müller might also be alive. A defector from Polish intelligence, unnamed in the file but likely Michał Goleniewski, according to historians, mentioned hearsay evidence that Soviets recruited Müller in 1945. West Germany's BND thought it unlikely Müller was in the USSR, but possible he was alive elsewhere. The CIA couldn't conclude definitively whether Müller died in early May 1945 in Berlin. If Müller escaped with files, that would explain some gaps. But there's no evidence he carried payment ledgers out. The Arelson Archives, formerly the International Tracing Service, holds extensive Nazi documentation. Their collection includes Gestapo files and card indexes from Frankfurt, Hamburg, Koblenz, Lena, Luxembourg, Münster, Neustadt, Osnabrück, Trier, Wiesbaden, Würzburg, Düsseldorf. The Würzburg files alone comprise 88,745 documents. Individual documents on German Jews number 13,531. The card files contain hundreds of thousands of entries. These are surveillance records, arrest files, deportation lists, not payment ledgers. Historians working with surviving Gestapo files have reconstructed how the system worked. Only 15% of Gestapo cases started from surveillance. The majority began from public tips. The willingness of Germans to inform made Germany between 1933 and 1945 a prime example of panopticism. The Gestapo functioned as a reactive organization constructed within German society and structurally dependent on continuing cooperation of German citizens. Robert Gellatly's research published in 1988 analyzed local offices and concluded the Gestapo was mostly bureaucrats and clerical workers depending on denunciations for information. The reward structure varied. Some informers received cash, some got career advancement. Some acted from ideology, believing they were helping rid the state of enemies. Some wanted rivals removed. Some were motivated by personal gain. The motivations were complex, but the Gestapo tracked something. They were German bureaucrats. They documented everything. The question is, what survived? Files at the German Bundesarchiv, Federal Archives, include Gestapo case files that have been indexed and microfilmed. Electronic data compiled from these files contains over 114,000 persons. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum holds microfilm reels of selected Gestapo records, reels covering Berlin, Frankfurt, Hamburg, and other cities. Some reels contain hundreds of frames, others thousands. The breadth is impressive. But researchers seeking systematic financial accounting of informer payments find scattered references, not ledgers. What we have are fragments, a notation in one file that an informer received compensation, a mention in interrogation records that someone was paid for information, references in post-war trial testimony that individuals received money for denunciations. But the master books, the comprehensive accounting, those either burned in Berlin in April 1945, were destroyed deliberately by retreating Nazis, were captured by Soviets and remain in Russian archives unexplored, or never existed in the centralized form we imagine. That last possibility deserves consideration. Maybe the Gestapo didn't maintain one master ledger. Maybe payments were handled locally. Each regional office keeping its own books. Saarbrücken tracked its 50 informers independently. Nuremberg tracked its 80 to 100 separately. No central repository. When the Gestapo offices fell, the local records scattered. Some destroyed, some captured, some lost. The decentralized structure would mean there was never one book to seize, but there's evidence of coordination. The RSHA, Reich Security Main Office, formed in September 1939 by uniting the security police with the SS intelligence service. The Gestapo became Office 4 of the RSHA. Heinrich Müller ran it. Hermann Göring had created the Gestapo in 1933. Rudolf Diels was the first administrative chief. In 1934, when Prussia fully integrated into Germany, Heinrich Himmler took control. By 1936, Himmler was chief of German police. He merged all police forces, gave himself operational control over Germany's entire detective force. That centralization suggests centralized record keeping. The RSHA coordinated deportations of Jews to ghettos, concentration camps, killing sites, killing centers. They tracked numbers. The Höfle telegram sent by Hermann Höfle on January 11, 1943 to Adolf Eichmann in Berlin detailed numbers of Jews murdered in concentration camps. In 1942 alone, 1,274,166 Jews were exterminated in 4 camps of Action Reinhard. The Korher report, compiled by an SS statistician, gave a conservative total of 2,454,000 Jews deported to extermination camps or murdered by Einsatzgruppen. The complete status reports of Einsatzgruppen death squads were found in Gestapo archives when searched by the UES Army. These reports list an additional 1.5 million murders during mass shootings. The vast majority were Jews. The Nazis documented genocide. They kept statistics. They filed reports, but when it came to the mechanism that fed the machine, the informers providing names, the paper trail goes cold, or rather, it was made to go cold. Consider the timeline. Early May 1945. Berlin falls. Soviet troops secure the ruins of Gestapo headquarters. They find documents, they capture what wasn't destroyed, the Americans arrive, the British arrive, everyone wants intelligence. The Counterintelligence War Room issued a statement May 27, 1945 about priority targets for interrogations in the German intelligence service. Top of the list were Nazi intelligence officials involved in foreign intelligence, RSHA Amet 6. Next were security police and SD units in occupied countries. Gestapo officials came further down the target list. The instruction to interrogators of captured RSHA officers asked where are Schellenberg, Ohlendorf, Müller, Steimle, Zandberger. All but Müller were subsequently located and interrogated. The fortnightly report covering June 18, 1945, stated no leading Gestapo officials had yet been arrested, and it seemed clear from most reports that Müller remained in Berlin after the collapse. His fate contrasted with other Gestapo personalities who fled south, but by then, days had passed, weeks, time to burn files, time to scatter records, time to make evidence disappear. The Nazis had practice. Sonderaction 1005, starting mid-1942, focused on removing traces of mass executions in the East. They burned bodies. They destroyed crime scenes. They eliminated witnesses. Applying that same thoroughness to documentary evidence makes sense. If you're destroying mass graves, you destroy payment ledgers too. After the war, denazification tribunals processed millions of Germans. The tribunals classified people into 5 categories: major offenders, offenders, lesser offenders, followers, exonerated. Evidence determined which category. Witnesses testified. Documents were examined. Former Gestapo members faced scrutiny. But without comprehensive payment records, prosecutors couldn't prove the full scope of informer networks. They caught some. Trials happened. Justice occurred in fragments. But the complete picture remained obscured. In places where Gestapo records substantially survived, Würzburg most notably, historians reconstructed operations. Every member of the Würzburg Gestapo was a career policeman or had police background. The Nazis valued police competence over politics. In 1933, almost all men who served in various state police forces under the Weimar Republic stayed in their jobs. Continuity of personnel, continuity of methods, but continuity of payment structures? The Würzburg archives are rich in case files and poor in financial ledgers. The Gestapo had power to imprison people without judicial proceedings. Schutzhaft, protective custody. An oddity required the prisoner to sign his own Schutzhaftbefehl declaring he requested imprisonment presumably from fear of personal harm. Political prisoners throughout Germany and from 1941 throughout occupied territories under the Night and Fog Decree simply disappeared. Up to April 30th, 1944, at least 6,639 persons were arrested under night and fog orders. Total number who disappeared is unknown. If informers provided information leading to these arrests, and if compensation was paid, those records could be anywhere or nowhere. The Polish government in exile in London during World War II received sensitive military information about Nazi Germany from agents and informants throughout Europe. In 1942, the Gestapo discovered a cache of Polish intelligence documents in Prague, and were surprised to see Polish agents gathering detailed military information and smuggling it to London via Budapest and Istanbul. The Poles identified German military trains, tracked order police battalions sent to Soviet-occupied areas in October 1941 that engaged in war crimes and mass murder. Polish intelligence was extensive. The Germans knew they had an information problem. Would they not equally know the vulnerability of their own informer networks being exposed? Would they not protect those records or destroy them? On August 2, 1941, beim Taos, Gestapo Chief Heinrich Müller sent a telegram ordering that especially interesting illustrative material should be sent to Berlin because the Führer should be presented with continuous reports on the work of Einsatzgruppen in the East. Hitler received regular updates. At the end of December 1942, Hitler received a document from Himmler entitled Report to the Führer on Combating Partisans, stating 363,211 Jews had been murdered by Einsatzgruppen in August to November 1942. This document was printed in large font Hitler could read without glasses and marked Shown to the Führer. The Nazi leadership knew numbers. They tracked results, but informer payment documentation. That would be internal accounting. Sensitive but not prestigious. Useful but potentially incriminating. The kind of records you might prioritize for destruction. After Germany's surrender, Allied forces established military governments. In the American zone, the Office of Military Government United States Zone, UMGUS, took control. They inventoried captured assets. They tracked Nazi property. They seized gold, currency, art, documents. The foreign exchange depository processed valuables, but their focus was tangible wealth and strategic intelligence. Informer ledgers would be intelligence. Were they tagged as priority? Did they go to counterintelligence units? Were they microfilmed? Or did they languish in boxes, get misplaced, deteriorate, and vanish? The UNINC-S. Army Signal Corps photographed captured documents. The National Archives holds microfilm collections. Thousands of reels covering German military records, Foreign Office files, Nazi party documents, police records. Researchers can order reels and scroll through frames of typed German documents. Some frames are crisp, some are faded, some are damaged. The process of capturing, sorting, filming, and preserving millions of pages was imperfect. Things were missed, things were lost, and things were deliberately withheld. The CIA withheld documents from the OSS collection for decades. When the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act passed in 1998, it forced declassification. The 400,000 pages released in 2000 represented a fraction of the total OSS archive. Most had been declassified years earlier, but some materials remained withheld by CIA. These documents cover diverse topics and activities. They are disorganized. Among them might be fragments about Gestapo financial operations, or not. The released materials focus on interrogation reports, operational assessments, intelligence on Nazi officials, not accounting ledgers. There's another angle. The Soviets occupied East Berlin. The captured materials the Americans and British never saw. Russian archives hold German documents seized in 1945. Some were returned to Germany, some remained in Moscow. The Russian State Military Archive holds Fond 501 covering Gestapo Berlin records from 1913 to 1945. Selected portions have been microfilmed and shared with Western institutions, but selected portions, not everything. What remains in Russian archives unexamined? What payment records might be there? During the Cold War, intelligence agencies on both sides had reasons to suppress certain Nazi records. If Gestapo informer networks included people who later worked for Western intelligence, exposing them would be counterproductive. If the Soviets captured records showing informer networks in areas that became East Germany, publishing those records would destabilize the new communist government by revealing complicity. Both sides had incentives to keep some things buried. In 1970, Ponsas, West Germany's BND, Federal Intelligence Service, thought it unlikely Müller was in the USSR, but possible he was alive elsewhere. The speculation about Müller's survival kept the question of Gestapo records alive too. If Müller escaped with files, where did they go? The CIA investigation concluded they couldn't determine Müller's fate, which means they couldn't determine what happened to files he might have taken. The practical problem researchers face is simple. You want to study Gestapo informer payment structures. You start with National Archives, Record Group 242. You find captured foreign records seized, you request boxes, you get agent card files, personnel dossiers, interrogation reports, wanted lists, surveillance files, you find references to documents subsequently destroyed. You find notations that files were burned, you find scattered mentions of payments, but you don't find ledger books with columns showing name, date, amount paid, information provided. Those books either don't exist in the archives or weren't captured or were destroyed. You try the Bundesarchiv in Germany. They hold extensive Nazi records. You request Gestapo materials, you get case files, arrest records, deportation lists, correspondence, minutes, statistical tables. You find operational records, administrative files. But again, comprehensive payment ledgers, not prominently available. You try the Arelson archives. Their e-guide shows extensive holdings, Gestapo card files from multiple cities, individual documents numbering in tens of thousands. You request access. You search the database. You find biographical information, persecution records, camp documentation. The archive is invaluable for tracing victims, for researching perpetrators, but for financial mechanisms of informer compensation. The documentation is thin. The pattern repeats across institutions. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Imperial War Museum in London, Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, all hold Nazi records, all have Gestapo materials, all provide evidence of the machinery of terror. But the financial scaffolding, the payment systems that lubricated denunciation, remains obscured. Here's what we're left with. We know the Gestapo used informers extensively. We know compensation was sometimes provided. We know the system was bureaucratic and relied on documentation. We know massive quantities of Gestapo records were destroyed in April-May 1945. We know some records were captured by Allied forces. We know some records remain in Russian archives. We know researchers have access to substantial surviving documentation. But we don't know definitively what happened to comprehensive informer payment ledgers because we can't find them. 3 possibilities exist. First, the ledgers were destroyed deliberately by the Nazis before surrender. Burning them protected informers and obscured the system's financial reality. Second, the ledgers were captured but remained classified or unprocessed in archives somewhere. Russian military archives or intelligence agency holdings could contain materials not yet released. Third, the ledgers never existed in the centralized, comprehensive form we imagine. Payments were handled informally or documented locally without master accounting. Each possibility has implications. If deliberately destroyed, it shows Nazi awareness that the informer payment system was incriminating evidence worth eliminating. If captured and hidden, it suggests post-war intelligence agencies found the information too sensitive to release. If never comprehensively documented, it reveals the system operated on more ad hoc arrangements than we assume. The absence itself tells a story. After 12 years of the regime, after millions of denunciations, after countless investigations sparked by informer tips, after a system that depended on ordinary citizens providing information, we cannot fully account for the financial mechanism. We know it existed. We see its effects. We read the case files started by anonymous tips. We trace the arrests. We count the deportations. We document the deaths. But the ledgers, gone. Here's the cold truth. In 1949, workmen demolishing the last ruins of Gestapo headquarters at Prince Albrecht Strasse found cells. They found remnants. They found the bones of the building. But by then, 5 years had passed since the collapse. Rubble had been picked through by survivors looking for anything useful. Soviet occupation forces had combed the site. American and British intelligence teams had searched. What remained were fragments. The site sat empty for decades. In 1987, it became an exhibition space. In 2010, a permanent documentation center opened. Visitors walk the grounds where terror was administered. They see excavated basement walls. They read panels explaining the history. They confront what happened there. But they don't see ledgers showing who got paid what for which betrayal. Those records, if they survived anywhere, remain hidden. Hidden in archives not yet fully processed. Hidden in files marked too sensitive for release. Hidden in basements of institutions that don't realize what they hold. Or hidden in the most effective way possible, reduced to ash in a burning Berlin in May 1945, destroyed by people who knew exactly what evidence they were eliminating, scattered into smoke above a collapsing regime, taking with them the detailed accounting of a nation that paid its citizens to destroy each other. The question wasn't whether evil kept books. Evil kept meticulous books. The question is, what happened to them after the devil lost?